Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, August the 31st, 2024, last day, of course, of August. It's been quite a week in terms of technology and politics. Three major stories. Pavel Durov, the CEO of Telegram, was arrested in Paris, created a great deal of controversy. A lot of people very unhappy, others more ambivalent. Then yesterday, Brazil blocked X after a certain Elon Musk ignored court orders. Surprise, surprise. Brazilian judge ordered the suspension of X. And finally, Mark Zuckerberg published a letter on what he calls Facebook censorship by the Biden administration when it came to COVID-19. Lots of material then for Keith's Tears. That was the week newsletter. And of course, he leads with the Durov arrest. He asks in his editorial, Irrational Liability. Is Telegram a criminal plot? For regular viewers of the show and for people who know Keith, you won't be surprised to hear that Keith is not very happy with Durov's arrest. I'm more ambivalent. Keith, what's the problem? Why shouldn't we be celebrating the arrest of Durov?
Well, he isn't a criminal, is the first thing. He's been this is an administrative arrest in pursuit of a political idea, and that political idea is that when the human race uses social media, the owners of the platform should be liable for what the people publish, and that is a political idea that is at odds with the entire history of Western civilization, which is a history of increasingly allowing individual freedom to
Yeah,
say.
I don't know was it Gandhi or Nehru who, when he was asked about Western civilization, his response was that would be a good idea. So I'm not entirely sure what Western civilization is, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. How are these three things, the Musk, the X case in Brazil, the Durov case, and maybe the Zuckerberg case, connected? It seems to me as if the governments are getting into the business of getting rid of Section 230 in an abstract sense and simply saying, look, we're going to determine internet policy. Is there any truth to that, whether it's Brazil or France or the US?
Well, there's a lot of truth to that. That's exactly what's happening. The UK, by the way, is leading the pack with the new Labour government, imprisoning people involved in the recent riots for statements they made of opinion on social media, often for several years in prison. So this has been a trend for a long time. We've talked about it here on the show. We started to highlight it a few weeks ago, but we've talked about it for a few years.
Yeah, was it a couple of weeks ago, you asked if Europe was dying, although I'm sure your editorial that time was about innovation in Europe rather than government policy. You mentioned Western civilization, Keith, which, as I said, is a rather abstract notion. But some people might argue that Western civilization is built on responsible, strong government, and without that, you wouldn't have Western civilization.
It sounds more like fascism to me, Andrew. Strong government is not. Remember, the government is of the people, for the people, by the people. So the concept of strong government is usually against the people, and I don't really see any threat of democracy here. What I see is a threat of fear, and it's really driven by something quite new, and it's worth pointing this out. There were really no global technologies until the 1990s. Before the
Well,
19,
writing is a global technology.
yeah, but it wasn't. People didn't publish books in every language simultaneously globally, so it was really national in character. The internet didn't change that initially. The internet was initially pretty much in English, and so governments that don't have English-speaking populations didn't fear it. But little by little, and really accelerated by the rise of mobile, where you've got two operating systems in every country in the world, either Android or iOS, the same apps everywhere in the world, unless the government blocks them. Suddenly, you have this global canvas that each individual government is now faced with a new challenge, things being published outside of its control, and that is new. And governments always react badly to losing control. So I think this is essentially a control-driven set of events, and the law is used as a weapon to exercise that control. And in this case, the Telegram founder is a victim of that, but there'll be many more. If this passes muster, why isn't Zuckerberg exactly the same? Why isn't Musk exactly the same? What is the
Well,
difference?
Musk, yeah. I mean, and as I was saying to you before, you and I we agree on some things, but on this front, we're completely in disagreement. I would actually, if X shut down tomorrow, I think it would benefit the world. It would probably be the beginning rather than the end of what you call Western civilization. I think it's a corrosive platform that does no good to anyone. But I don't want to. I mean, you know what I think. I know what you think. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for X to be shut down by Brazil or any other government. The Telegram case is a particularly interesting one because, of course, it does raise the issue of accountability. So if you're doing something illegal on Telegram, selling drugs, building nuclear weapons, um, should should the platform owner be liable? Is that the French case against Duro?
That is the core of the case, but I think you and we might agree here if we stand back and just think about the word privacy. You can mock Western civilization, but there are some gains that are
I
post.
don't know what it. I mean, as I said with Nero, I don't exactly know what it means, but that's another subject.
Well, post feudalism, individual freedom became a thing, and democracy, meaning every individual is equal as a citizen and has rights, is a thing. Those are not just.
Right, but I think Nero's point might have been that along with all that, you had Western colonialization and mass murder and all the rest. But let's not get stuck into that, Keith. But let's talk about
No, but
Telegram
yeah,
and
but back to
whether or not
so back to
'cause
privacy then, Andrew. Back to
right,
privacy. What is really happening here is that Telegram employs encryption,
right,
and encryption means you don't know what people are saying.
right, and which is
That
why people use it. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it.
Yeah. Now it isn't fully encrypted. Public conversations are not encrypted, but private conversations are. And Telegram supports groups very similar to WhatsApp.
Right.
And unlike Apple, Telegram doesn't throw away the keys, so it does have the keys available to unlock encrypted conversations. And therefore, governments have come to it and said, we want to know what these private conversations are about. Now, it turns out that Telegram took a slightly different approach than Apple. What it did is it distributed the keys globally into different domiciles so that
Mm.
no single government has jurisdiction to require it to hand over the keys. In order to hand over the keys, a government would have to get jurisdiction in multiple
Is
nations.
there when it comes to the French case, are the French authorities, is there a particular case they're pursuing? Is there is a broader complaint against Telegram generally?
I think there's a lot of speculation, and my idea there is equally speculative. But the belief is that the French police are pursuing a number of cases. Child pornography appears to be one of them. They
Surprise, surprise.
they have no
Money
real.
laundering, I'm guessing. I mean,
No,
would it
but
be
wait,
fair
no,
to
no,
say?
wait. No, let me.
Okay, go on.
I didn't answer your question yet. So basically, what's happened is they've come to Telegram saying, "We want you to unlock these things," and Telegram is saying, "You have no legal right to ask us that." Telegram's in the right there, and French government, you must pursue this by getting each government where the keys are to agree to giving them to you. and no one has ever succeeded in that. To date, Telegram hasn't ever handed over a single byte to any authority anywhere, and so the French, in their frustration, have arrested the leader. Now, the leader also
Well, he's
doesn't
not
have,
the leader, he's the founder.
he's the
The leader
co-founder and
is,
CEO. Yeah, well, whatever you want to call him, but
well, it's important to distinguish. He's not a leader. He's not
so
Macron. He's not Big Brother.
so what does it represent that they arrested him? It represents their failure to be able to find legal means to get to that content, and in their
Mm.
frustration, they're using bullying, basically. And
Well, bullying, I don't know whether you call the state bullying. You've always, I don't really understand why. Maybe we can do a whole show now. I don't know what your problem is with the law authorities. Maybe you got in prison when you were a young man, but
I did twice.
well, that probably explains why you're so suspicious of the state. I like people going to jail when they've done wrong.
Yeah,
When it comes
but did he do wrong, Andrew? What's he done wrong?
Well, I on the Durov case, I think I'm not necessarily in support of him going to jail. But what's interesting, it seems, and it's in this sense, it's like the Brazil case, is the governments are taking it into their own hands, and they have every right on French soil or on Brazilian soil. They can't, the Brazilian government can't close X in the US or France, but they can in Brazil.
Yeah,
Um,
but do you know why they're doing it in Brazil? Have you gone in to look at the reasons?
No, but what I'm saying is that here we have, and you and I have talked about this a lot on the show over the years, this growing conflict. You see it in historical terms between a networked age, a post nation state age, and the old nation state. I don't necessarily see it in those terms, but it's certainly a major conflict brewing.
Well, look, what's brewing is a conflict between governments and the people. Social
Yeah,
media.
that's where I mean
Look,
that's
look,
where you and I would disagree.
look,
I would say governments.
let me finish my
It's not the,
sentence.
well, hold on. It's not the people who are.
Well, let me finish my sentence.
Go on.
What is on social media other than the people?
I'm not on it.
Durov isn't making any posts on Telegram. It's his users. They are the people. And what the government objects to is what the people are doing. And they're saying to social media, tell us what they're doing, spy on them. And just like if that was happening in every cafe in Paris, that you had to put microphones in place to spy on conversations, we'd all be up in arms.
Well, but if hold on, if first it's not the people because not everybody's on it. I'm not on social
Well,
media.
whoever is on it is part of the people, though.
Well, but that's another question. But if everyone in French cafes were dealing drugs and child pornography and laundering money and doing whatever everybody else is doing on the dark web, then you would have microphones and police in every French cafe, wouldn't
Well,
you?
you know what Brazil has done is shown the real reason, and of course the French.
Okay, well, I'll let you do the real, what you call the real reason for Brazil, but then come back to my question on
No, I
French
will. I
cafe.
will. The real reason in Brazil is that the political class want to silence their opponents, and they're accusing X of facilitating the opponents in affecting the outcome of the election. So Brazil, it's a very clear-cut case of state censorship against political opponents. And the judge, by the way, who passed this thing, is essentially a dictator in Brazil. Uh,
Well, compared to, I'm guessing that Musk and Bolsonaro are somewhat friendly. So
yeah.
this is a more of a leftist. So that depends on your politics. But okay, so I take your
Well,
point. I'm
coming
sure
back
there's
to
some truth
France,
to that about Brazil.
coming
But
back
come back to the issue of French cafes and people doing illegal things in them. Wouldn't that trigger lots of cameras and microphones, surveillance in those French cafes?
I don't think they could get away with that without a revolution. I mean, would the
Well, they
man?
could in London. I mean, London now has, I don't know how many million cameras. So people are
Yeah,
watching
I
everybody.
think London's a very unusual, extreme example of surveillance. I agree with you, but I do think that uh, lots of legal private things happen, both in cafes and on social media. For example, people having affairs outside their marriage. is a
Well,
good
that's not
example.
illegal,
That's what I said, legal and private. Now, it's almost impossible
especially in
to,
France. I mean, I think it's illegal not to have an affair, isn't it, Keith?
and moving right on, if you insist on spying on illegal private things, by definition, you have to spy on legal private things as well. There's no ability ahead of the surveillance to understand what the content's going to be. And by the way, that's in the US, there are laws against the Secret Services spying on its own citizens.
Right, and
So
that comes back to Section 230 and the post office and whether the state has the right to open people's letters and all the rest of it. But it is interesting the way in which, I mean, I guess if you had to guess two governments that would take the law into their own hands, you would certainly guess the French and maybe the Brazilian as well. What about on the Telegram case? Obviously, Durov is Russian. He's based, I think, in the Gulf. Is
he's a
there
he's a French citizen, though.
yeah, but he's got a Russian base. He made his money at V Contact. Is there a Russian angle here, an anti-Putin angle to this arrest?
Well, Durov is the typical anti-Putin hero. Uh, Putin seized Durov's prior company because Durov refused to disclose to Putin things that were happening on that platform. So Durov is consistent. He basically supports his users' privacy, and he's done the same here. Now, here's a guy, and this really shows the trend, where Putin and Macron are wearing the same hat. They want to break privacy.
A
And
Napoleonic hat. We should. I should have put um, a mock-up of Putin and Macron in Napoleon's hat.
yeah, so do we support the citizen's right to privacy? Yes or
I
no?
don't. I do not. I mean, and again, this is
What
where
about
you and
your
I
own
differ. I
privacy?
don't.
Well,
Yeah, because I don't break the law.
you want
If I'm dealing in child pornography or selling or buying illegal
no, but
drugs,
you're not. You're not. Other
but
people
then if
might
I
be.
was and I got, but many people are breaking the law on Telegram. So whether or not Durov is responsible, that's more complicated legally and morally. But your argument suggests that
No, I
these
no.
well, hold on, let me finish. Your argument suggests that these platforms, Telegram, WhatsApp, that they should have a kind of carte blanche, that the governments have no right to access them.
Actually, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the platforms have every legal right to refuse. I'm not saying government shouldn't try. Just like police and agencies can seek out criminals within nation states or across borders, even, but they have to be successful on their own terms. And in this case, there is no legal right for the French government to break the encryption keys of Telegram. And so they are circumventing the law by arresting him. And they are the ones who are invading or seeking to invade the privacy of legal users of Telegram, not just illegal. And of course, illegality hides in plain sight everywhere in the world. I'm not
Yeah.
in favor of the illegals getting away with their illegality, but I'm also in favor of private citizens being private.
So I wonder whether Telegram is sort of in the gray area between the dark, and I mean that literally and metaphorically, in the gray area between the dark web and what most people, you and I certainly, and most of our listeners, I guess, think of as the internet. Will this case and cases like this result in a deepening, a darkening of the dark web,
No,
and then an internet where you don't have platforms like Telegram, which might not be such a good thing? I don't
yeah,
know. Do you see my point?
I do see your point, and I think to answer it, one has to kind of step back a bit and look at the tools available to criminals to pursue private criminality. Telegram isn't even a good one. Signal would be way better.
Mm.
And there are other software is easy to write. I'm pretty sure really sophisticated criminals have their own software that isn't even known to us. So it's very weird to claim that Telegram is the center of criminal conspiracy. I really doubt that, because the criminals would have to be stupid. Because there are better tools out there.
Well, there are some stupid criminals. And the other interesting thing about the Durov and the X case is there's such different platforms. X is in the business of visibility. You don't go on X to do anything privately. It's always public. Whereas Telegram is premised on privacy, on secrecy.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's whether, I mean, I guess what people find distasteful about X is the kinds of things which are said publicly, whereas what people are troubled, or governments are troubled with on Telegram, are the kinds of things that are said privately.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to start with the idea that the French government has some right on its side here, you are compelled to look at WhatsApp, which is end-to-end encrypted, even in public. You're compelled to look at Twitter direct messages, which are private. You're compelled to look at almost any service that provides encrypted end-to-end, including iMessage, Apple's.
But you would have a right if there was, God forbid, another terrible bombing in France, and the French authorities got hold of the WhatsApp or X accounts of the bombers. Wouldn't they have a right to access that data?
Well, let's assume though that the criminals in that case were clever enough to use iMessage. Apple doesn't have the keys. It's actually incapable of breaking its own encryption. So that is Apple making.
Okay, but that's Apple. But what about the others?
I don't know the specifics of each case, but some of them will have the keys, and some of them, by the way, as Zuckerberg proved this week, do concede to governments what the government is asking for.
So what was Zuckerberg up to here? Was he schmoozing with Trump in his all too public letter about the Biden administration pressuring the company to censor content related to COVID?
Hard to tell. I think maybe he was having a mea culpa moment personally, and in the context of what's going on in Brazil, maybe also with what's happening in France, was triggered to go on the record about something he's believed for a while, possibly. But certainly what he said is he regrets having been so subservient to government requests in the past, because in retrospect, both on COVID and on the Hunter Biden case, it turned out that the Biden government was wrong.
So this is a declaration, even in spite of the Durov and the Brazil cases. This is Zuckerberg's declaration of independence from governments.
You can't really trust him to be that strong, because he's shown in the past he's prepared to blow in the wind. But we'll see. But yes, on the face of it, yes, I think that is probably the tone of it.
It's all very interesting, Keith. And meanwhile, in California, where you and I live, there's a growing storm over regulation over AI, a Californian bill that I think Newsom has or will sign. It's called SB 1047. It's reached his desk. What do you make of this? Is this part of this imminent storm between government regulation and internet companies, especially with AI, which is, of course, the new thing?
Yeah, I think this is a slightly different framing is required to understand this, but they do overlap. I think this is really to do with, on the face of it, safety, AI safety, in quotes, which is broadly defined as meaning uh, uh, what AI says and also what it can or cannot do.
It's watermarks. And what's interesting is that OpenAI, Adobe, and Microsoft all support it too. Do you think there are some companies, which are some internet companies, maybe Microsoft, and even Apple, which are actually celebrating what's happening in Paris and Brazil, and they think it's a good thing, it benefits them?
I doubt that. I think encryption is so deep now. One of the big issues in the French case is you need to have a license from the French government for encrypted communications, which is a new fact. Nobody knew that before. I assume it's true. And encryption software is open source, so anyone can build
Well,
an.
it's the old Eric Schmidt remark about privacy and secrecy. It says, I don't have any problem revealing everything I do because I don't break the law. Isn't that a fair point? I mean, if you're not
Well,
breaking the law, then what problem would you have the government seeing what you're saying?
well, Eric Schmidt is a bit of a hypocrite because Eric Schmidt is a well-known philanderer who does lots of private things he would not want to be disclosed.
Well, I think he's actually quite a public philanderer. He doesn't seem
Right.
to be too bothered with people knowing about it.
So, well, do you know any of the stories? I think they're pretty well hidden. So, I think
He'd probably be quite at home in Paris.
I would say most human beings have parts of their life that they absolutely want to be private, and that there's nothing wrong with that. It's reasonable. I once heard you, Andrew, give a speech that you'd rather live in a city than a village because you want to be anonymous, and anonymity and privacy go together. You can't really be anonymous unless you can be private. So, I can't remember which book you were launching when you said that, but it was some book launch.
Yeah, although those are two different things. I'd rather be in a city in the sense that one has the freedom to invent and reinvent oneself, but it doesn't give one the freedom to break the law.
It's really not about breaking law. I mean, surely you can see that focusing on lawbreakers in order to break privacy is.
I'm not sure that's the case, though. Are you suggesting that coming back to this, and then we need to leave it and move on to some other stories? But are you suggesting the French government, for example, is using this as an excuse
Oh,
to
absolutely.
destroy
Not even.
private communications?
No question about it. Every government wants to do that. Every government hates
Why?
because private citizens being able to engage in encrypted conversations breaks every secret service in the world.
What about letters then? I mean, physical letters. Does every government want to open every letter we send to one another? Or historically, they didn't want to do that. They haven't changed.
Well, there's lots of evidence that they
But you
tried
still
to.
need the law. I mean, leaving aside the French case, you still.
Look at Watergate, Andrew. Watergate was a president breaking the law against his competitors. The state is quite clearly capable of wanting to surveil legal opponents. I mean, that's not me making that up. It's not
I'm
paranoia.
not sorry. I'm not clear on your point with that one.
Well, what
I mean, it wasn't as if the
in the,
state
look,
the state
look at
investigates
Snowden.
law breaking.
Look at Snowden. Snowden exposed the fact that the US Secret Service, using foreign governments, was snooping on every American citizen. Every American citizen. Every phone call.
Well, that may be. I mean, that's a. Well, they were not snooping on. They're not doing it, but that's another story, Keith.
Oh,
Anyway, let's
no,
move on. Maybe we'll come back to this.
honestly, Andrew, you have to read it. They use keyword technology to trigger deeper surveillance. It's all real. So I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to protect privacy. And if you use criminality, of course, none of us want child pornography anywhere, and we want those people locked up. But if the price of doing that is everyone's privacy goes out the window, that's a big price to pay from a societal point of view.
Yeah, I am not convinced. Spoken like a true libertarian, but this will be a subject we come back to. Lots of other news this week, especially associated with AI. OpenAI, according to the journal, is in talks for a funding round valuing it above $100 billion. You predicted a few months, maybe a year ago, Keith, that OpenAI would be worth what, $5-10 trillion? What was your prediction?
I think those numbers are not unlikely to happen in the longer haul.
And I've always been ambivalent, but maybe you're right on this one. You think OpenAI is ahead of everybody else, head of Google, head of Anthropic. You still think that?
I think Anthropic is certainly neck and neck now. Anthropic's really good, and Amazon just announced a big distribution deal where Anthropic's system is going to be behind ALEXA, which I don't want to say because my ALEXA will respond if I do. So Anthropic is really doing a good job of being in the race as
But
well.
is this, I'm thinking from your expertise as an investor and valuations, this $100 billion valuation doesn't seem, if OpenAI is indeed one of the leaders, if not the leader in AI, it's not an unrealistic valuation, is it?
It's 30 times their revenue, according to the rumors of their revenue being at 3 billion now. So it's certainly within reason for a high growth startup to be valued at 30 times revenue. And if their revenue gets where I think it will get, which is more in the hundreds of billions, then those higher valuations are going to happen.
And does this mean that all those legal corporate shenanigans of last year with Altman getting thrown out and then coming back, that's all been resolved, and that OpenAI now is just another standard for-profit startup, that all the non-profit the effective altruistic, the effective altruism roots of OpenAI have been done away with?
I think that's still in transition. There's still quite a few structural legacies that make the not-for-profit part and the board of that still having quite a lot of power, but it is under Altman's control now. This new money, by the way, a lot of it's coming from Apple, apparently.
Which is another of your pieces that you connect with. Of course, Apple is investing in OpenAI. Is that Apple waving the white flag and acknowledging that it can't do AI itself?
Not just Apple, I mean, Amazon's waved the white flag as well. It is quite astounding that the companies that started down this path, I don't know, 5 or more years ago, are way ahead of big tech. And Google's the exception. I think Google's systems are pretty good. Not yet fully there, but catching up. But Google's got a problem, which is it can't really deploy its success without damaging its search business model. So Google's in a bit of a difficult situation.
And Google have another problem this week, an antitrust lawsuit against it, which was filed by Yelp, which you connect to. Is this significant? Yelp's always been a critic of Google. They've always been resentful, I guess, of Google's power and reach.
Yeah, I watched the Yelp CEO on CNBC.
Is that still Stoppelman or is it somebody else?
I can't remember his name, so I'm not sure of the answer to that. Anyway, they're just being opportunistic in light of this court finding that we discussed last week. They're saying, okay, well, if Google has a monopoly, then it also has a monopoly in local search, and we're impacted by it. So we're going to file a lawsuit sitting on the shoulders of the findings of the previous one. Of course, the previous one is going to be resisted by Google. They'll appeal it. And so we're several years away from anything meaningful happening here.
Well, at least it gives those lazy lawyers at Google something to do, right? They need something to do. Keep them off the streets. We are moving on, Keith, to Startup of the Week. Surprise, surprise, an AI company, the generative AI coding company, Magic, which we've been talking about Eric Schmidt landing a $320 million investment from Schmidt, Atlassian, and others. What is it about Magic that's so interesting for you?
Well, Magic is focused on an area that a few others are too, which is automated software engineering. And I think after teaching, software engineering is probably the job most transformed by AI.
You use it a lot, don't you?
I use it constantly. In fact, I couldn't do what I do without it. It makes me better in so many different ways than I actually am. So yes, but this is a bit beyond what I do. I use AI as a co-pilot where I'm driving. This is actually using AI more holistically as a initiator, like fully end to end. And so I think it's kind of interesting. And Eric Schmidt, whatever we think of his philandering, he's a very astute observer of innovation.
Well, I know what you think of his philandering. I've always been quite open-minded on that. There's nothing illegal about it.
Actually, I'm also open-minded. I just it's the fact that he's against privacy, which is hypocrisy.
And actually, I tend to think that it's on the coding front that AI has the most potential to change the world. As we went to broadcast today, there's an interesting piece in the New Yorker by one of the best science fiction writers around, especially on AI, Ted Chiang, who wrote a piece, the weekend essay this week. It didn't get into your newsletter. Why AI isn't going to make art. I tend to agree with him on that front. I think it commodifies a certain low-end, cheap art. But so the real opportunity, I think, for AI may be in coding rather than in art. But maybe we can come back to that next week. Finally, Keith, X of the week from your favorite Xer, not everybody's favorite Xer, a certain Elon Musk on the Californian case, SB 1047. What is Musk saying about 1047?
Well, I put it alongside his other tweet, which was for free speech.
Yeah.
But this one is supporting the California, let's say, modified legislation, because he has been on the record saying that AI can be dangerous.
Well, that's because he doesn't like OpenAI. He's very
Yeah,
jealous or
it's a
resentful of
political
OpenAI.
decision. I agree, but it does show that Musk is also capable of hypocrisy. Because
Oh, well, that's news, Keith. Are you still half in love with him? What does he have to do to
well,
make you
you,
hostile to him? It seems like
I,
whatever he does, you still rather like him.
well, I think you can have more than one opinion about a person, and both can be true. My opinion of him is he's one of the most important innovators the human race has produced, and at the same time, I think he's like a teenage child in a tantrum often, and both things can be true.
And what about the way I think one thing that pisses some people off, probably including myself, is the way he seems to use X now just as his own platform in the same way as Trump uses Truth Social.
Well, he always did that, but now he's the owner. I don't think his behavior's changed. It's just that our perception changes because he's the proprietor. But he is a risk taker, right? I mean, he's prepared to open up his reputation by saying what he really thinks, which in some ways is admirable, even when you disagree with him.
Well, in Brazil, it seems to have got him to have his company shut down. It'll be interesting to see what will happen. We are entering September, Keith. Or August supposedly is a time of no news, lots of news this week. And we will see you again next week, where I'm sure there will be much more technology news and this growing storm conflict between governments and tech companies. So have a great week, Keith, and I'll see you again next week.
See you, Andrew.